This is not the last presentation we're doing for this class, but this particular presentation does seem to wrap up a number of themes that we've been presenting different philosophers, and each of them has had some theme associated with them. The theme for this one is interdependence, and it features Judith Butler and Sunaura Taylor. And just for identification purposes, Judith Butler is on the right as we look at the picture, and Sunaura Taylor is on the left. I'll give a little bit more information on both of them in the next slide. Judith Butler is very well known. She's an American philosopher, teaches at University of California, Berkeley. She's best known for her work on gender theories, and I think you could say that the LGBTQ plus movement owes a lot to her contributions. Sunaura Taylor, whom I think is known to her friends as Sunny, is lesser known, but she's a working artist, and she's also an animal rights activist and a disability rights activist. You can, if you want to look up some samples of her work, I mean, it's her artwork, it's pretty fascinating to see. I haven't included any examples of it, and some of it is startling, but it's clear that she sees some connection between animal rights and her own self, the disability or impairment that she has. So what we get in the conversation between the two of them is a mix of gender issues and disability issues. And we come to see that there are more than a few similarities between the two. The place for this interview is in San Francisco, and the two characters begin by taking a walk. The conversation begins with Judith Butler kind of acting like their interviewer. So she asked Sunny Taylor a number of questions about what her background is and her experience as a disabled person. So she begins by talking about what it means to take a walk, and for instance, if you're confined to a wheelchair, which Sunny obviously is. And Sunny claims that she takes a walk. She uses that terminology, those words, and she says that and other people in the disabled community would also use it as well on a daily basis. So, and it's the two of them as they exchange point out that it's like everybody needs something. I mean, even to take a walk. I mean, so it's not so out of the world. I mean, to take a walk in a wheelchair, and you say everyone needs sidewalks or spaces to walk in. Everyone, you need shoes and things like that. So this idea that you don't need anything to take a walk is kind of just a partial understanding of what's involved here. This idea of taking a walk is also an aspect of a lot of the interviews that were done by Astra Taylor. I mean, this idea of bringing philosophy out into the streets meant that the interviews would be conducted while people were moving. You see that clearly in some of the the segments, not as clearly in others. I mean, the Cornell West one is they're driving in a car. There's the one with Peter Singer is clearly they're out walking around, and the one with Martha Nussbaum, clearly they're out walking around. But it's this idea of being engaged in physical activity is one of the ways in which philosophy comes out into the street. So here they're very definitely taking a walk. Sunny Taylor observes that one of the reasons why she moved to San Francisco was because San Francisco had arranged everything for the benefit, or many things for the benefit of disabled people. Everything was more accessible in this city, and so it was possible for a disabled person to have more access to public spaces because of that kind of work. And this was, in a way, she comments that this improved access that people have to public spaces does a lot towards the acceptance of disabled people, because usually disabled people have a hard time getting out into public, and people don't get used to seeing them so much. So if you live in a place where it's possible for disabled people to get out in public and be there, it makes it easier for people, other people, to get used to their presences. Sunny, so that's a help to have that kind of environment to function in. Sunny, emphasizes though that everything that you want to accomplish as a disabled person has to be struggled for. And so there's a kind of nothing comes easy. She talks about even going into a coffee shop, for instance, can be a big deal if you're a disabled person. No one else would have to think too much about that. She described one instance when early on for herself where she used to have to go to a park across the street from the coffee shop and sit there for like hours sometimes. I mean, to build up the courage to actually go into the coffee shop. So it's kind of to overcome that kind of struggle is a part of what the lived experience of being a disabled person. So there's a lot of struggle just to have a normal existence. So it's difficult enough to even have access to public spaces, but in a city like San Francisco, where there is access, it's a help for disabled people to become more accepted, just because they become part of the environment. People see them more often. Even still, disabled people cause a lot of people to feel uncomfortable because basically they don't know how to deal with them, or they don't know how to interact with them. And in that discomfort, or that not knowing how to relate, will oftentimes cause people to avoid interactions with disabled people. But that doesn't help the problem at all for a disabled person. In particular, as Sunny relates, since she has limited use of her hands, and sometimes she'll use her mouth in order to do things that would seem kind of shocking if other people saw it. I think she says she can use her mouth to open doors, for instance, and that people are shocked by seeing body parts used in unusual ways, and people view that as it's abnormal behavior. So that's another factor that disabled people have to deal with. But as Judith and Sunny converse, I mean, the idea that the norm that's violated may well just be an ideal or an assumption that people have, which in reality doesn't actually exist. But there is this, and it's related in a way to this norm of self-sufficiency, this idea that everybody should be able to take care of themselves. But clearly, in the case of disabled people, in a lot of instances, they're going to need help for even basic things. So that just creates more of an obstacle. So this raises the question of interdependence, and Butler poses the question pretty succinctly. You can say, do we or do we not live in a world where we help one another? And we'll see that that's not, for some people, they're not used to that way of thinking. They don't believe that people should need help, And so this, in a way, I mean, Sunny talks about when she goes into a coffee shop, for instance, she'll have to ask for help in terms of getting the coffee to a table so that she can drink it. And she says, well, she's capable of holding the coffee cup in her mouth and going to the table, but that's actually more disruptive than asking somebody to bring the coffee to the table for her. So, and it seems like, a world where people accept the idea that we're interdependent, that we need to help one another, that wouldn't be a problem. But it's still something that is not obvious to a lot of people. The discussion in general brings back some of the things that Nussbaum was talking about, and some of the criticisms that she had with respect to the assumption of self-sufficiency and independence, which seem to be contained in the social contract way of thinking about things. This idea that whoever was going to be a participant in the basic social contract should be somebody who's self-sufficient and independent. But oftentimes that's not the case, and it's sort of, if that's the standard, it excludes people. It would exclude people with disabilities. Butler shifts gears a little bit at this point, and she tells the story of a young man. There's a story about a young man who walked with a distinct swish and didn't feel like he should change the way he walked to please other people. But as a result of his mannerisms, that one day he was attacked and killed by a group of young men in a town, I think it's in New England somewhere. And it just raises the question, why would that happen? Or what's so offensive about the way somebody walks? And why such a strong reaction, such a violent reaction to being exposed to that? Why so much hatred? Why the violence? Towards people who are just different in some way. That's a pretty profound question, and it's easy to think it just applies to other people, but even all of us have our prejudices and our assumptions about what's permitted and what isn't permitted and so forth, and our reactions to people who are different. So this is an instance of what we would call homophobia. And we see that if you challenge the stereotypes or the norms that people have, it makes them feel uncomfortable. In some sense, it makes them question themselves. And it's complex psychological feature of human beings, I think, but people feel threatened by other people who are different than they are, and oftentimes they act out or they react out. You could say homophobia is a fear or a hatred of homosexuals. So it's like, what is that? What's that all about? And why should it incite sort of violence towards other people? Why is it so intolerable that there might be somebody who is different? But we can see it's very common, and the reactions are frequently very strong and harmful to people. Butler, in an attempt this, a difficult psychological issue, I think, Butler talks about it in terms of vulnerability or permeability. And again, it has to do with this independence and so forth. So if we're trying to understand violence against people who are different, people who are on the fringes or marginalized minorities, etc., you'd say violence can be interpreted as an attempt to assert one's own impenetrability or one's own invulnerability. You act out against other people, uh, and somehow you feel like you're asserting something about yourself, a kind of weakness maybe that you become aware of as a result of your interactions with other people. This issue extends broadly, I think. Arguably, anyone or anything that is different presents a similar challenge to people. We see fear and hatred mixed together. And the truth is, we all have difficulty in accepting differences, but we don't really see what's going on as we have those experiences. Seeing past the differences or being able to see other people as fellow human beings, that's a kind of an elevated attitude with respect to others that is hard to come by. We still expect everyone else to be like ourselves. It seems to me that we can see this behavior in children, and you say how mean-spirited children can be. I mean, so it's just a mirror, really, for a certain aspect within our own natures. In a way, it's more obvious in children, more blatant, that they act out against differences. But you could say we're not children, and or that when you become a mature adult and so forth, you're supposed to have a better understanding. Uh, you could say we should recognize that each of us is that we're not isolated, independent individuals. You say with this famous line, "No man is an island." All of us we should recognize or come to recognize that we're whatever life is, we're all in this together somehow, and that we are who we are as a result of our interactions with other people, our interrelationships with others. But we have to work and we have to struggle in order to really be more inclusive and open to differences, open to others. Independence is an ideal, to be worked for, but we have to acknowledge that it's hard to come by. We kind of have to understand what stands in the way of it within ourselves.
Okay, I made a misstatement on the previous page at the very end there, so I hope you realize that the key word was interdependence in that last sentence. At this point, I wanted to kind of move in the direction of concluding our studies in this area, and just point out that a lot of the discussions that we've been having involve issues that begin to converge in certain respects. So I just wanted to point those out and do a kind of review of the topics that we've been trying to address. The first issue, and I wouldn't say we spent a lot of time on this. We did spend time on Cornel West, but we didn't spend so much time on his work in racism, which is really the main thrust of his career in a way. So you could say the racism struggle for racial equality or equal opportunity comes from Cornel West, where he provided the focus for that. Secondly, we say feminism, the issue of feminism, struggle for equal opportunity for women in society. And I think Martha Nussbaum hit that topic most directly. Disability rights and struggle for acceptance of people with disabilities and equal opportunity for them in society as well. Clearly that was Sonny Taylor. LGBTQ plus, or you could say that struggle for acceptance and equal rights for people of different sexual orientations. That was a primary focus for Judith Butler. The struggle for the ethical treatment of animals and came up on a number of occasions. These are the creatures sentient beings that we share the planet with. That started with Peter Singer and then was continued by Martha Nussbaum. And then in the last instance, Sonny Taylor is an advocate also for animal rights. The issue of the ecology, I mean, that seems to be a different kind of issue than the other ones that I've just listed. But, there is a struggle in order to maintain the health of our planet and the health of our environment. And Slavoj Žižek addressed that. Not clear that what he had to say helps in the direction of solving it, but he helped us understand the difficulty in thinking about the problem and, help us maybe get rid of some of the presuppositions we have about it in terms of ideologies. So a lot of these issues, they have to do with social justice. You say, thinking about and how do we create a more just society and a more just political environment so that all these desired equalities, can be attained for people. That was a primary thrust of Martha Nussbaum and her capabilities approach. And also, you'd say that would be an aim of Cornel West as well. So it's a lot of convergence between these issues. And you see that it's something that a lot of contemporary philosophers have tried to address in one way or another. I think a final question would be, how does philosophy play into this? The fact that you can see injustice and then you can imagine how things could be better, but you see that it involves change, and change always is in the face of resistance. So there's the struggle is like to overcome the resistance or to deal with the resistance that's inevitable if we want to try to make changes in the way that people think about things. That would seem, philosophy should be concerned with that, and that'll be our next focus. Our final slide will be on the philosophical life.
Finally, to wrap our course up, I want to revisit something we did at the end of the Cornell West presentation, where we listed some of the things that he seemed to include in terms of what it meant to live a philosophical life. Some of those items I would keep as he laid them out, and I think there needs to be some additions, probably, in light of some of the things that we've just been talking about. But I mean, if we think of philosophy as a good thing, which I do, and whether you do or not, I don't know, but if philosophy has to do with some of the things I'm going to include here, I still want to say that philosophy has to address issues of lived experience. And in a way, to live a philosophical life is to come to terms with how we live our lives, and how we live our lives intelligently, ethically, compassionately, and courageously. In general, we kind of have to adopt within our approach to things a critical disposition. And that just means not taking things at face value, but sort of, trying to dig beneath the surface to see what's really going on. So we want to adopt a critical disposition, as West puts it, wrestling with our desires in the face of death, wrestling with dialogue, keeping dialogues open in the face of dogmatism, and generally struggling to live an examined life, for me especially. So many of the obstacles we have to overcome are obstacles that are buried deep within ourselves. And we see them outside of ourselves in the world, but it all has to begin with kind of self-understanding, self-study, self-understanding, which is arrived at through examining ourselves, as we said, looking into the dark corners of ourselves. So a lot of the problem areas are buried deep within. So our fears, our prejudices, our assumptions about who and what we are and how we should be. All of this needs to be examined, brought into the light of day. Unexamined, all of these things still function in the dark, and because they function in the dark, they keep us in the dark. Examined, I think, is one of the things that West said: when you examine yourself, you can become a different kind of person. And I think that's kind of, it could be an aim for all of us. I mean, to become more enlightened, to become better than what we are. So, thank you for listening.